Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at our second part of revising for the English Language Paper 1 exam. We're going to be going through all of the key questions, so if there's anything you're really concerned about leading up to the exam, please do give us a comment and let us know if there's anything that you need covering. Look at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. So the question we're going to be working on today is question 2 for Paper 1. How is the writer use language to describe the house? And that is worth 8 marks. Before we actually think about the challenges that we're going to go through in a minute, I wanted to break down the question a little bit. So if you think about this question, all the questions that you're going to get for any kind of paper 1, question 2, it's going to start the same. How has the writer used language? The thing that is going to be different, however, is the second part, where we're asked to describe the house. So this is just going to be based on the extract that we're looking at today. Whatever extract you get in the exam, it will change ever so slightly. It's also important to note that within this question, it is worth 8 marks. So the first challenge we're going to think about then is, can you identify the key words in the question? This is going to help you to break it down and understand specifically what the examiner is looking for. Next, I'd like to think about how many paragraphs should you write for this response. As previously stated, this is worth 8 marks, so try and think about a proportional response in terms of the paragraphs you are producing. Then we have our mega challenge. I like to think of 5 or more language techniques that come to mind. It might have been that it's been a while since you've done this question, so just spend a minute trying to think of any techniques you can remember will be really helpful when you attempt this exam. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So here is our question. How has the writer used language to describe the house? And it's worth a total of 8 marks. So for the challenge then, some of the key words in the question were words like how, language and house. Now the reason why how is an important word is because if we're asking them how have they done it, that means we must talk about the technique or the methods that have been used by the writer. In addition to this, we know that this is a language question, so we don't need to talk about structural techniques and just language techniques for this one. In addition, we know that we need to be writing about the house. Now this might seem to be quite an obvious thing to point out, however it is really important that you actually read the question and understand completely what you need to focus on. For the super challenge then, for this question, as it is worth 8 marks, you should aim to write somewhere between 2 to 3 paragraphs. Mega challenge. Some of the typical language techniques that you would find in any kind of paper 1 question 2 are things like similes, metaphors, imagery, personification and alliteration. Now of course there are many more language techniques, and again if you're not too sure about them, please do give us a comment below and let us know if there's anything else you need us to go through before the exam. So within this video then we're going to be going over the following things. We're going to recall the key skills needed for the language question, understand how to approach your response, and then finally apply your understanding to write a response to question 2. It's also important to note that if you want any feedback or anyone to mark your work, please do get in touch and let us know. The exam is really quickly approaching, so the more work we do on this ahead of the exam, the better the results are going to be. Look at the mark scheme and attempt the challenges that follow. So this is the mark scheme. This isn't the whole mark scheme, we've just gone for the top level of the response. So first thing I'd like you to think about is, what is this mark scheme asking you to do? And then next I want you to think about what kind of paragraph structure should you use for this question. And then finally, what is the difference between the level 3 and the level 4? If you actually have a look at this, and maybe you can actually zoom in on it as well if you're watching this on a phone or something, you'll see there's actually not much difference, but we will go through this in a bit more detail in a moment. Class feedback. Check your answers against the teacher's ideas. So here's our mark scheme then. Again, we're only looking at level 4 and level 3. This isn't the same as grade 4 or grade 3. Level 3 and level 4 are actually the higher marks that you can get on question 2. So the first thing we want to note is then, so the mark scheme is asking us to do the following things. So first of all, we have to comment on the effects of language. And if you notice, this is actually the first bullet point within the mark scheme. And the reason for that is because it is the most important thing within this question. If you're not commenting on the effects of the language, then you're really not going to get the higher marks. you need to use high-level quotes. Now this can be a little bit confusing. What is a high-level quote? Well, a high-level quote is one that I would class as judicious, one that is going to give you many things to talk about and allow you to talk about the effects in a lot of depth. Next, use subject terminology. So you need to use language techniques and word class as well. It's not good enough that you're just using quotations. If you're not backing that up with actually key terminology, you're just not going to get a high mark. For the super challenge, the paragraph structure can vary. I know, for example, that within our setting, for example, many of the teachers use different paragraph structures, and all of them are fine as long as you are doing the following things. As long as you're addressing the question, using appropriate quotations, showing a strong understanding of language, and linking back to the question. All of these things are key, so it doesn't really matter whether you do a Peter, a petal, or anything like that in terms of your paragraph structure. As long as you're able to do those following things, then you'll have a strong response for question 2. Next then, for the mega challenge, the main way to make sure you get a level 4 is to do the following thing. Analyze the effects. The more you do this, generally speaking, the more marks you're going to get. Choose the very best quotations from the passage. Now when you think about question 2, there may be, let's say, 5 or 6 quotations you could choose, but are you picking the very best ones? And we'll know if they're the good ones if you can actually talk about them in depth. If you pick a quotation and you find that when you come to talk about the effects of the language, you haven't really got much to talk about, then it hasn't been a good choice of the quotations. That is why it's really important that we practice this. Selecting the quotations and actually explaining the effects of the language is really pivotal in terms of getting a good mark for this question. And our final one, use a range of high-level language techniques showing the depth of your knowledge. So that means don't constantly talk about the same language technique. You've got to show this examiner that you actually understand multiple different kinds of language techniques and not just focusing on the same one for every single paragraph that you write. Now what we're going to do is we're going to think back to that exam question, which is how has the writer used language to describe the house? We're going to have a look at a text and see if we can identify any quotations that we could use to respond to the exam question. So it says then, the house dominated the landscape, looking like a stain on the once beautiful environment. There was a sinister sound of crows shrieking. The sound punctured the silence like a knife. The smell of rotten and decaying wood seemed to ooze out of every inch of the building. The once beautiful house looked decrepit. Shards of glass sat dully in the window frames like the remains of broken teeth. No one in their right mind would come to a place like this. One morning, after standing there alone for years, the house sensed a new presence. Someone was approaching. Finally, after years and years, someone was again foolish enough to enter the house and face the horrors that lay behind the threshold. If you want to pause the video here or go back and look at the extract in more detail, please feel free to do so. What we're going to do now is just offer you a very simple writing frame in case you're unsure of how to approach question 2. So one simple way of doing this is by going point, evidence and explain. I'm going to show you how you can actually make sure you can use that to get a reasonable mark in the exam. So first of all then, with our point, we're going to address the question to show you know what you're supposed to focus on. With our evidence, we're going to select an appropriate quotation, one that relates to the question and has language techniques or methods that you can comment on. And then for the next part, we're going to do our explanation. We're going to explain the effects of the method within the quote and link back to the question. This should be the longest part of your paragraph. So that is a really good thing to get into your head if you're actually writing your response and you find your point and your evidence are quite long, but your explanation is lacking somewhat. That means that you're not really spending enough time talking about the effects of the methods. So you need to keep it in your head that your point needs to be nice and short. Hopefully your quotation is going to be nice and short, and your explanation needs to be more in depth, because that is where the majority of the marks are coming from for this exam question. If you're struggling to start, you can use the example on the next slide to help you with your own. Again, if you want any feedback, just get in touch and we'll try and make sure it gets marked before the exam. Look at the response and attempt the challenges that follow. So on the left hand side then, we have a response written by a student. And we're going to go through it and we're going to try and understand if this would get us a reasonable mark within the exam. So the student has said then, the writer has used a simile to describe the house in a sinister way. This is evident in the quote, "The house dominated the landscape, looking like a stain on the once beautiful environment." The simile creates negative imagery and implies that the house has a negative impact within its location. This is further emphasized through the use of the noun stain, which connotes something that is dirty and unkept. So when we're looking at this response, then I'd like you to consider, has the response used all the elements that we went through in the writing frame? Next, if you can pause the video or go back, can you use the mark scheme and try and decide what level you think the response is working at, and then try and justify your answer. And then for the mega challenge, what I'd like you to do is to use this response as a starting point for your own work and submit it for marking and feedback. So if you have a teacher or a tutor available to you, please do reach out to them and try and get them to mark as much as you can before the exam. The more practice, the more feedback you get before the actual assessment, the better it's going to be in the actual exam. Now in terms of our next video, we're going to be going through the following things. We're going to recall the key skills needed for question 3. We're going to understand the key structural techniques. And finally, hopefully you're going to be able to apply your understanding to attempt an exam question. Now if you need any additional support, the new videos will be added every single week. In the lead up until the exams, we're going to aim to add a new video maybe every 2 days or so. If you wanted to get in touch, then leave a comment below or visit our partner channel Bookworm Teaching for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks a lot for listening guys, and all the best with your work and revision in the future. Bye bye.